boop, beep, boop, beep, boop. Boop, bop, beep, boop, beep. Are you the robot?
Yeah.
Beep, beep, boop, beep, beep, boop. Hey BookTube, it's Kim at Middle of the Book March, and I don't think I'm gonna, maybe I'll put an intro in, but I've got a big stack of books to talk to you about. Today's video is on some of my favorite nonfiction in honor of Nonfiction November. And I am planning on reading some nonfiction this month. I'm not sure which ones, I'm not sure how many. I am listening to one already. I am listening to How the Word Was Passed by Clint Smith, and I will put a picture right up here. I'm listening to that on audio in my car, so just started that one. But I wanted to show you, I think the majority of these books I've read since BookTube, but I do have several that I read before I came onto BookTube. And a lot of these you all have already seen on my channel before, but because I have so many wonderful new subscribers that I am so grateful for, I thought I would show you some of my favorite nonfiction books coming from a reader whose first love is fiction. So, why do I love these books? The majority of them are there's a couple of different topics here. A lot of my favorite nonfiction books are memoirs, narrative nonfiction, journalistic nonfiction, and history. So I think I've got a nice little stack here that fits into all of those categories. So let me get started. The first one is Being Immortal by Atul Gawande. Nonfiction that makes me cry. That's another one of my favorite genres, and this is it. This is a book about our end of life. We are all going to have an end of life. And if we're lucky, we're going to get to a ripe old age and have a very peaceful end of life. But what this is, let me read a very quick paragraph. It says, medicine has triumphed in modern times, transforming the dangers of childbirth, injury, and disease from harrowing to manageable. But when it comes to the inescapable realities of aging and death, what medicine can do often runs counter to what it should. And he discusses end-of-life care, hospice care, the care of elderly and people who are very near to their death. And he talks a lot about getting ready for that stage in our lives. He also talks a lot about hospice care and elderly care and care that takes place either in a hospital or a hospice facility. I read this book about a month after my mother passed away, and she had very severe complications from diabetes. And she was pretty ill the entire year before her death. But her death did come as a surprise. We weren't expecting it was going to happen when it did. She only spent a weekend in hospice before she passed away. And it was quite peaceful, and it was extremely sad, but understandable. And I read this book a month after she passed away, and it got me in the gut in all the feels. This is an exceptionally written book. It is exceptionally researched, excellent narrative tone. I highly recommend this, but be warned that it's very emotional, and it's also one of my favorite types of nonfiction. The next one is narrative, but it's also journalistic, and this is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. And this is, doctors took her cells without asking. Those cells never died. They launched a medical revolution in a multi-million-dollar industry. More than 20 years later, her children found out. Their lives would never be the same. This is the story of Henrietta Lacks, who I believe in the 50s, I don't remember, in the 50s, she went to the doctors for pain, and they discovered that she had, I believe, cervical cancer, or it could have been uterine cancer, but she was not treated. She was a Black woman in the 50s, so she was not really treated in a humane way, or in a way where her pain was important to address and her discomfort was important to address. But what they did do is they took cells from her body. They took cancer cells from her body. And she died painfully, and none of her family was told what had happened or what the doctors had or had not done. But they ended up keeping these cells, and they continued to multiply, and they became the basis of decades of cancer research. But none of her family ever knew that. So they basically stole parts of her body, whether it was a negative part in cancer cells or a piece of her body, a piece of her essence, and continued to use it for free to study medicine, study cancer. And when her family finally did find out, I believe it was possibly because some of Skloot's research, it became a massive court case for redemption for this family and for Henrietta Lacks. But it's a fascinating story. It's enraging that people were treated this way by the medical establishment. This is one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time, and who would have thunk it, because it's about horse racing. And not only do I have no interest in horse racing, I have some deep personal issues with racing animals for sport. As much as I want to think that racing horses and their carers and jockeys and whoever are treated really well, we have seen in the media that they are not always treated that well. But this is Biscuit, an American Legend by Laura Hillenbrand. And I don't even remember why I decided to read it. I think this was one of those books that had been on my shelf for a really long time. And I thought, what the heck? I had heard amazing things about this book, and it did not disappoint. It is absolutely fabulous. The narrative tone, the stories, the history of horse racing, the history of Seabiscuit. I was mesmerized. There were parts where I wanted to cry. There were parts that were sincerely funny. The story of this horse was astounding and magnificent and historical and miraculous. Laura Hillenbrand is an exceptionally good narrative nonfiction writer. And this is one of 2 books that she has written. She lives with a chronic illness and wrote some of this book from bed. So if you haven't read this book, I don't know what to say to get you to read it, to encourage you to read it. But she has a way with writing that keeps me captivated with subjects that I've never really had an interest in. And that is extremely high praise for a narrative nonfiction author. This book I've had on my channel a few times. This is a book I read prior to BookTube. I also read the first 3 books I just talked about were also prior to BookTube. So this one is one of the best documentation in book form on grief. And this is Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking. Joan Didion talking about the death of her husband, the sudden death of her husband from a heart attack, I believe. And the type of relationship that they had and the extreme grief that she experienced and the year of working through that. Joan Didion is, of course, or was, of course, a writer, an author, an intellectual, and her writing in this book is exceptional. The way she describes the love and the emotions, her rage at grief, at dealing with her husband's death, is nothing short of miraculous. This is one of the best accounts of a woman being forced to deal with grief, being forced to deal with death. And she talks about her entire family, including her daughter. It's an exceptionally written book. So this one is another one. You know, a lot of these books, I guess the reason why I want to say these are some of my favorite nonfiction or my favorite of all time is because that's what the topic of this video is about. And that's the reason I pulled these books. So if I keep saying that, make it into a game of whatever sort of how many times I'm going to say, this is one of my favorites of all time. But I can't stop saying it with this one. Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. This is his memoir on growing up in extreme poverty in the US. He was born in the US and then his family emigrated back to Ireland, where they are from. And dealing with this level of poverty and family dysfunction, alcoholism on the part of his father, children dying in their family, not having a bathroom, not having enough food to eat, not having clothes. He's barefoot in this picture, not having clothes to wear, not having shoes, not having an education, stealing food in order to eat. But throughout this book, it is one of the funniest memoirs, one of the most tear-inducing memoirs I've ever read. And it gives us a very small picture into Ireland in his time of when he grew up there. And it's just absolutely fantastic. I can't say enough about his writing. And this is also one of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. I read this many times before BookTube, and then I listened to the audio and in the car, cried, laughed, all of it. And it's just one of the best memoirs. Okay, this one, I dropped a book. Hold on a second. I'm going to read. Oh, I'm still in the frame. I dropped a little book. This one is not only narrative, but journalistic nonfiction. And one of the most striking things about this book is the author at one point had to go into hiding because of the research that he was doing. This is Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty by Patrick Radden Keefe, who's also the author of Say Nothing, which is also exceptional. The reason I picked this one is the amount of research that he put into this book to uncover the abject corporate greed and the personal greed of the Sackler family, who basically caused and promoted the opioid epidemic in the United States. This is a company where they basically developed Valium, or in the 50s and 60s, Mother's Little Helpers. And they also developed opioids, OxyContin, oxycodone, in all of its different iterations and forms. And what they did to push these drugs on the American public, it's a pretty dense book, but it's one of the most infuriating pieces of narrative nonfiction I've ever read. And the research, the level of research that Patrick Radden Keefe did is nothing short of masterful. I don't even know, just the level of pure soullessness on the part of the Sackler family is unreal. And if you have any inkling to read this type of topic or book, or if any of this type of thing has affected you or your family or somebody that you know, pick this up and give it a shot, because it's part of our American history, unfortunately, and excellent to know, excellent to read about. Now, Joan Didion's memoir is exceptional when it talks about dealing with grief. And this tiny little memoir it's less than 100 pages, is exceptional when it talks with dealing with depression. And this is Darkness Visible by William Styron, a memoir of madness. He is the author of Sophie's Choice, and you talk about one of the most horrifically depressing books and movies ever made. But this William Styron is the author of that. And this book details his period of major depressive episode. And I have bipolar type 2 disorder, which includes chronic depression and chronic anxiety. I am well cared for and well medicated. But he wrote this in the 60s, I believe, 60s or 70s. No, it was 1985. Sorry about that. But obviously, almost 40 years ago. But just writing what he detailed of his own experiences with depression and the level of depression, it's harrowing. And the fact that he could write about it and the way he wrote about it and the way he brought the reader into the setting of what he was dealing with is just fabulous. So highly recommend that book. It is not for the faint of heart, because it's depression. It's major depression. And it's an exceptional book to read on the topic of mental health, but it is very difficult. This one I recently read, and actually I listened to this on audio and loved it so much that I didn't go out to buy one, but I found this book, this copy in a thrift store, and immediately snatched it up. This is Broke in America, Seeing, Understanding, and Ending U.S. Poverty by Joanne Samuel Goldblum and Colleen Shaddix. this was phenomenal. And they talk about economics in the United States and being broke in America and what that means and how people deal with this, how people deal with poverty in this country. And it's Seeing, Understanding, and Ending U.S. Poverty. This book is divided into sections, and one of the things that they did so well is they actually offered solutions and they offered action, courses of action. They didn't just talk about statistics and poverty and what it looks like in our country and who are the poor. There's a lot of statistics in here, but they also offer action, which is not always done in nonfiction, but they are exceptional at it. And I highly recommend this one to read about our country's economics and why people are poor and what we can do about it. One of my favorite history books of all time, and I am 100% in favor of revisionist history. It is These Truths by Jill Lepore, A History of the United States. Jill Lepore is a historian in Boston. I don't remember if it's Boston, Harvard University. David Woods Kemper, 41, professor of American history at Harvard University. You don't get much better credentials than that. This book was provoked rage in me and also tears, because this is revisionist history at its best. I lost track of the amount of highlighting I did. And the first 200 pages, I did a lot of highlighting. After that, I was just so mesmerized by the book, I forgot to highlight. But she tells us the actual history of the United States. When we go through school as American students, we learn the glorious escapades of the founding fathers and Christopher Columbus and how he discovered America. We now know that all of that was completely twisted and misconstrued. And Jill Lepore gives us impeccable research on the history of our country from the very beginning, from the years, many hundreds of years before the institution of slavery. And I was dumbfounded and embarrassed to not have known the things that I read in this book. But United States schools do not teach much of this material. They teach about the glory of the founding fathers. They teach about the discovery of America. They teach about the escapades, the wars won, and the magnificent presidents that we had, and all of their good deeds that they did. But we rarely learn about the depravity and the embarrassment and the humiliation of the founding of our country. Don't get me wrong. I love living where I live. I love being an American, but we must look at these truths. We must look at the truth of the founding of our country with realism and practicality. We can't just assume that everything was awesome. It wasn't. And it's one of the best history books ever. The last book is the biggest, and I already knew the ending of this book long before I picked it up. I already knew what I was going to read about. I did not know how well it was going to be written. I did not know how much material was in this book. Actually, I honestly didn't care, because I was so fascinated with the entire book from beginning to end. It helped explain so much for me. It gave me insight. It gave me all bunch of emotions for this person in this biography. And this is wicked heavy. It is Red Comet, The Short Life and Blazing Art of Sylvia Plath by Heather Clark. I bought this, and it was on my shelf when I was doing a BookTube prize round in nonfiction, and it was in my round. And I was terrified, because I had this and I had Barack Obama's memoirs, which are both incredibly long. This is longer. But I started reading this, and this is one of those books where I could not wait to get back home to put this on the table, because it's so heavy, and continue to read. I was hooked from the very beginning. And I have always been a fan of Sylvia Plath. She's always been a fascinating character to me, even as a teenager. And being able to read about her life in such detail, and I'm going to say minute detail, but there are reasons for that. There are reasons to understand her brain and what she was going through and the details of her life, why she made certain choices, why she did some of the things that she did. And Heather Clark had such excellent access to source material about Sylvia Plath and other authors' research and other historical research and documentation. This is a phenomenally researched and written book, and cried at the end, cried like a baby, even though I knew how it all ends. And I would love to highly recommend this, but this is a very, very long book. If you are a fan of Sylvia Plath, if you've read her poetry, and you are willing to read a book that with the notes and index is 1,114 pages long. I'll tell you, the actual readable pages, the text pages, are 937. So if you're willing and able to read that long of a book, of a biography of a absolutely mesmerizing literary character in history, then pick this up. I absolutely loved it, loved it, loved it. So those are some of my favorite nonfiction books in honor of Nonfiction November. If you're at all interested in any of those topics, all of those are exceptionally highly recommended by me. So let me know if any of them sound interesting to you. Let me know if you are at all intimidated by some of the longer books. And if I could pick any one from this pile, pick this one up. If you are an American and you feel, as I felt, that your historical education was incomplete or had holes all over the place, consider this book. That's all I have for today, and thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye, everybody.